So, in addition to some of the fundamentals of responding to problematic behaviors or conduct, I thought it'd be useful to bring in a couple of other ideas about what responses might be best and how to even work toward prevention. So, it's worth noting that there's different styles of management that people tend toward. And this is kind of a spectrum idea. We're all slide in and out of these things, but a common way of thinking about it is three different kind of levels of management style, which kind of mirrors or is a lot like the assertiveness, passivity, aggression spectrum too, where authoritative management style is kind of like that assertive middle point, where the emphasis is on a nice balance of flexibility and sternness, right? A kind of openness and boundaries. So the structure is really important in any management situation, but particularly with children and adolescents that kind of yearn for it. But an openness and a flexibility for exploration and, of course, play and just changing variation in the expectations is really essential too. So that's a lot like assertiveness in the balance there, whereas a permissive management style is a lot like passivity. So anything goes, no big deal, I'm not going to correct things. Things can happen on their own, it'll work out, it'll be fine. I don't need to put a lot of structure in. And sometimes that wide open flexibility can feel like the authoritative kind of flexibility, when really it's just kind of giving in a lot. And the reason that maybe people end up there as management styles is, probably for a lot of reasons, one of which may be it's convenient, for short term at least. It's easier than to go follow through with correction and limitation and structure. But also I think maybe it's that sometimes it can be a little scary, even intimidating, to bring it toward that more assertive or authoritative middle balance. It's, in other words, a little bit harder to do. It's a little bit harder to be in that middle balance than to be permissive and passive. So on the wide other side of the spectrum, authoritarian type of style of managing a classroom, say, is definitely more my way or the highway approach. Its emphasis is on my authority because I'm the one who decides how this goes, a kind of over rigidity in the structure with very, very little flexibility. And whereas some situations may call for that, especially ones that involve safety, by and large it's not really the optimal way to go. Just like, as I've mentioned, the assertiveness balance, authoritative management style seems to be that sweet spot as well. So slightly as an extension to that, I wanted to mention a couple of things about logical or natural consequences. We talked about reinforcement and punishment, and how those play a part as the fundamentals of behavior intervention or behavior response. But logical consequences we might think of as opposed to exerting forceful control over the outer circumstances, forcing a child to do something, forcing them to sit or stand somewhere, forcing them to say a certain phrase that they're supposed to say. Those might be necessary sometimes, again, especially when safety is involved, but it really doesn't sink in too deep. The seeds kind of dry up on the surface, Whereas logical consequences tend to have the effect of linking outer circumstances to the inner experience and control of the child. They, over time, can begin to link their personal inner experience with the circumstances, rather than just doing what I have to do, say what I have to say to get out of the situation. So it might be thought of that there's three kind of components to a logical consequence. It's respectful, which in a nutshell just means that the problem is treated as the problem, right? The behavior, the conduct that's unwanted, that's the problem, that's the issue that you and the child are facing together, in fact, as opposed to the child themselves being deemed the problem or the issue. So that's respectful. Logical consequences are also relevant. That's the logical part or the natural part of it. It happens to relate to, or maybe even kind of fix the damages caused by the unwanted behavior itself. So, in other words, the behavior that is the consequence as a response to the behavior actually links to the problematic behavior itself, right? So the loss of privilege, the reward, or whatever else ends up being a natural unfolding from the problematic behavior itself. And lastly, natural or logical consequences have to be realistic, right? So what we ask the child to do has to be something they're capable of and of keeping up with, and it has to be something that we can track. We can't just give them this loaded, giant consequence and then not follow up with it. So these are principles of what makes a natural consequence or a logical consequence that seem to be pretty helpful in guiding the construction of one. That it's respectful, that it's relevant, and that it's realistic. So I also wanted to mention a couple of ideas about solving problems. When things don't go quite right, when there's way off track moments, and there needs to be an intentional regathering. I mentioned a couple of times about check-ins. Check-ins can be used to deepen the experience of the relationship with the child or adolescent, and it could also be used to repair and reconnect after a rupture in the interaction. And these check-ins after consequences or after corrections can really help solidify the relationship back again, so that the relationship isn't identified by those moments of correction, but of what follows after the correction, the repair, the reconnection. And I mentioned flexibility a couple of times. What that seems to imply is not only flexibility in response of my tone of voice and how quickly I respond and how much time I give you to talk, but also in overall expectations. Adjusting those expectations to kind of fit what seems to be a realistic expectation, right? And lastly, in reference to problem solving after correction or consequence, it's really helpful to ask the student what they thought about it, even asking what they thought about the consequence. Sometimes it's helpful because you might get the response, well, I thought it was, I didn't want to do it and I hated the consequence, I'm glad it's over with, that's fine. But sometimes you might notice that they think, yeah, I kind of get why you asked me to do that. I kind of get why that consequence was given to me based on what I did. And it also just invites them to respond or reflect on how they got there, what led to the behavior in the first place, and what they thought about the behavior. Maybe they regretted it immediately. Maybe it's a pattern that they need help getting themselves out of. So asking them a little bit about their own reflection of what happened can be really helpful to you, but also pretty valuable to them. And lastly, I would suggest, if possible, any preemptive strike would be preferable. Anytime we can prevent problematic conduct or behavior, the better. So one way that we might help children do that by helping them cultivate skills of self-regulation includes some mindful awareness practices, some of which I've shared with you: the body scanning, observing thought come and go, even the wide open see, hear, feel. And I've listed a couple on the handout that goes with this video. One from the work of Dan Siegel suggests the acronym SIFT, to sift your experience, noting or acknowledging right now what's going on in sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. That covers a lot of terrain. Pretty much all of our experiences are the sensations, images in the mind, feelings, and thoughts. So helping them kind of practice something that's accessible and easy to remember like that, that can be one thing. A really simple technique that's really easy to use, easy to teach, and easy to practice is name it to tame it. The reason name it to tame it is really effective is when we name our emotional states, the prefrontal cortex that helps us organize abstract thought, like what names we give to certain experiences, it helps that send signals to the more emotional limbic area of the brain, deeper in the center of the brain, and it soothes to some degree that emotional turmoil. It actually sends a specific neurotransmitter that's called gamma-aminobutyric acid. It's usually called GABA for short. And that inhibitory neurotransmitter, inhibitory means, okay, calm down. It soothes or renders more inactive. Sends that to the overactive emotional region of the brain. And that tends to happen more easily when we're able to put a name to the feelings that we're feeling, or the state, the emotional state that we're experiencing. So name it to tame it is a really easy thing to teach, simple thing to do. And last one I'll recommend is checking the internal weather. So treating mood or emotional states like weather patterns can be a really helpful little trick, because normally emotions and moods feel rigid and concrete and permanent, but really they're more like porous or open and shifting clouds and air. They behave more like that. Just like on a cloudy day, it might not look like the cloud is moving, but if you watch it for a moment, you can tell it's gradually sliding by. And treating our emotional states or moods like weather patterns, and treating ourselves like the wide open and clear sky, kind of implies or helps us experience emotion like they can't really hurt us. Emotion can fill the sky but never completely fill the sky. Storms can come and go. They can be as violent as they want to, but the sky is really undamaged. The sky can't be hurt or injured or broken. It just is space and lets whatever inhabit it come and go. So treating our inner experience of emotion and mood like weather patterns, and treating ourselves, our kind of full self, like the open space of the sky, and doing that again and again can be helpful in dealing with emotional dysregulation and help us regulate it or get ourselves back on track. And what I'd, in addition to those few things, you can find all kinds of techniques and especially child and adolescent type of practices related to mindful awareness, and do some research and find what fits for you. But above all, anything you use, what I'd strongly recommend is to practice what you teach. And before presenting any of these as suggestions to any students, or before leading them in any exercises, certainly do the work on your own. Do practice on your own for a period of time. And I've used a week or 2 weeks as a kind of trial run time frame, but try it out for yourself. See if it really helps you. It might not, it might help other kids, but it's best to get it under your belt, so to speak. So that constant commitment to practicing those things that you may share, of course, prepares you for sharing it more clearly, but it also can benefit you in the process, just like hopefully some of these self-care exercises I'm sharing with you can too. So helping arm students with the material that they need to begin to work through their own emotions as they arise can be a really helpful way to even prevent some of the difficulty that may come from problematic behaviors that can be best dealt with logical and positive reinforcements and consequences.